Hello, Fintech leaders and builders. So I'm Vasil Sulashuk from Insart, and this is our next episode of Fintech CTO Podcast. And like this video, subscribe to our channel, and let's start. So today we have Manik Surtani, our guest for our podcast. So hello, Manik.
Hello, Vasil. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. So very quick biography, like short professional biography for Manik. He is a graduate from Swansea University, Wales, UK, and he has a great experience building scalable and high performance data storage infrastructure. And he also influenced and significantly contributed to such technologies like JBoss Data Grid by Red Hat and gRPC, which is a high performance open source universal RPC framework. And he is a founder of Infinispan, which is in-memory distributed data store, and we will talk about this later as well. And in early career, as I know, he launched a number of startups, but then he joined JBoss and spent around 8 years with JBoss and actually Red Hat. And after that, he also spent 9 years already as an engineer and director of infrastructure at Square. And Square, as I hope everybody knows, was renamed to Block Inc. Just recently last year. So right now, also as I know, Manik is a part of Cash App team within the Block Inc. Family. So Manik, tell us more exactly. So what you do, what's your role more precisely with Square, with Cash App now?
Thanks, Vasil. That was a good summary. It's a bit of a long summary there. I work at Block at the moment. I've been at Block for about 9 years. I've had different roles over the 9 years in various parts of Block. Currently, I lead infrastructure and platform for Cash App. Cash App is we think of Block as an ecosystem of startups. It's not one company. There are a number of satellite companies underneath. And I used to work for the Square part of Block, which is the payment terminals and payment processing and so on and so forth. And about in 2019, I moved over to the Cash App side of Block. So I currently run the platform and infrastructure team at Cash App.
All right. So look, after spending so many years with such big companies like Red Hat and now Square, so what do you think is the best career for technology leader? Whether to proceed with smaller startups and smaller companies, and or to be a part of big companies?
Yeah.
So
what is your experience risk profile? I mean, risk profile is really what's going to dictate that, right? If you're someone who gets nervous about small companies and whether your company's going to get funded the next funding round and things like that, well, maybe that's not such a good idea for you then, right? Larger companies are always going to be more stable. You're always going to have more reliable paychecks and the like. So the rewards are not always as good. I mean, you're going to have a much bigger payoff if a smaller company really does take off, but it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's not to say that you can't have a good career in a big company. Of course you can. If you're good at what you do, you are going to get rewarded pretty well anyway.
All right. So look, I know that with JBoss and Red Hat, you've done so many interesting projects. So what would you name like the most important project for yourself, for your career, and that influenced your career the most?
That's a very tricky question. I can't play favorites. I've done lots of things that I care deeply about. I also think that I've had two separate careers. I've had a career as an engineer, as an IC. And I dipped my toe into engineering management and leadership. I've kind of gone back and forth a little bit, but I've sort of now settled on the leadership side of things. I currently run a team of 70 over people with multiple layers of managers under me and things like that. And it is a completely different ballgame from being a good engineer and being a strong IC. It's almost like like changing track altogether. It's like becoming a dentist, from going from being an IC to being a dentist. It's completely different. So with that light, there's no one project that defined my career. So if I were to pick one, I would pick Infinispan, only because it's the one project, I suppose, that has had so much dimensionality for me. Like, I started out as an engineer. I built the original prototypes with a few people. We ended up um, having to sell it and pitch it effectively, right? As though it was a
Right.
startup within Red Hat to get more funding. So at that point, I was changing hats. I was acting more like a CEO or like a founder than I was as an engineer. And then I had to go and recruit a bunch of people to help me work on it. I was acting more as a recruiter at that point. And then I had to change hats again and be more of a manager and a leader and a project manager and a product manager and all of that. So it's the one project, I suppose, that's given me the breadth of experience across all sorts of things. So I would call that out.
All right. Okay. So you mentioned that you're wearing different hats and done this before, and maybe you're doing this right now as well. But what do you like the most, like managerial job, or hands-on engineering, or maybe something else?
Yeah, it depends on which day of the week you talk to me.
All right.
Another trick question, right? Like, there are times when I absolutely am stoked about being a lead of a large organization and having organizational impact, and it really floats my boat. And there are times I just wake up saying, I really miss sitting down and writing code and solving hard problems technically. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, you've got to. It's hard to play in both spaces at the same time, which is where I've made the cutoff. I'm committed to one particular path at the moment, and the rest is it's fine. It's an interest. It's a hobby, but I don't spend a lot of time professionally writing code or building software.
So look, as I see, you've done many different patents while working with Red Hat and on JBoss, and they were related to many different things around the grid-based file systems, data gravitation, and non-blocking rehashing, asynchronous future-based APIs. So, what would you name the most important patent that you were able to use, to apply for some real project? Maybe a couple of these specific patents, and also maybe why is it important to have patents for the engineers?
Yeah, I'll actually answer the last question first, because one feeds into the other. I think patents in general are. It really depends. A company like Red Hat had a very, very interesting program around patents. They were trying to build a defensive portfolio of patents. This was happening around the time when certain companies and patent trolls were trying to acquire as many patents as possible and sue other companies, and that was their only reason for existing. So what Red Hat started to do was to build up a defensive portfolio. And a defensive patent is basically that if someone tries to sue you for something, you can counter-sue them for something entirely different, and then you decide to settle and say, okay, look, it's a draw, right? No one has to do anything, so you go away. So what Red Hat started to do, they built a defensive patent portfolio with a commitment that that portfolio was going to be used to defend anybody in open source. So any open source project could tap into that portfolio, because you would start to see patent trolls at the time going after open source projects and things like that. And so that was not cool. So that is why Red Hat started to do that. I think prior to that, I would have a very different opinion of software patents and whether we need them, but it was purely from a defensive perspective that I think we do, and that's important. So within that light, if you ask me what was the most important patent that we ended up filing for Infinispan, well, it really doesn't matter, because the patents were purely defensive. They were not meant to be a thing that we want to try and protect a key part of the software or anything else. No, this was a defensive portfolio. We were doing it to protect ourselves from anyone else trying to sue us.
Okay, and have you applied any patents while being with Square?
I have not filed any, no.
Okay, so is it less important, or why is it so? Why you're not doing this right now with Square?
It just so happens to be, yeah. I mean, I've focused a lot more on leadership and a lot less on building software. So yeah.
Okay, yeah, got it. So Look, in your biography, I see that you graduated from Swansea University, and I just weekly read something on their website. So they say this is where the bright futures begin. So, how studying in the university influence your future career? So, in what way?
I mean, not that much really. I mean, I've always been into software. I mean, I was a tinkerer long before university, and trying to take apart my parents' VCR and trying to fix it again and figure out how it works and stuff. It's stuff I've always done. So the moment I got my first computer, I mean, I was always interested in figuring out how it works and taking it apart and what have you. Became a very very early adopter of the Linux operating system because of that hacker mindset of be having access to the kernel all the way down to how it interacts with the hardware. And I've always found that interesting. University was a means to an end. I mean, I needed a qualification, I needed a degree, but yeah, I mean, I learned a lot of interesting things, but there's nothing in there in particular that stood out that influenced my career. In fact, if anything, there was a kind of bit the opposite. I did a lot of my master's project was in artificial intelligence at the time and expert systems, and I didn't do anything with that with my career. So yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. There are like different views whether you actually need the university or you don't need the university, whether you can use the knowledge and experience you've got from the university for future career or not. So that's why some for everybody the answer can be very different.
That's right.
And yeah, and I agree with you that for a real engineer and engineering career, certainly you need to start doing like some hands-on work as early as possible, like not only doing something in university, but also working on some real projects.
That's right. It all comes from curiosity, right? If you're curious about how something works and you want to take it apart and figure it out, that's the mindset that, yeah, at least in software engineering, that's the mindset that you want.
So, a part of my company mission, Insart, is to transform all verticals of the legacy financial industry. And we also say that we provide people with the tools to achieve financial freedom in the digital world. And I read on your profile that you say you're a mission-driven technologist, and this is always very important to me to know what are your whys, yeah, why you work on something, and what is your mission. So, Manik, so what's your mission right now, your personal mission?
Yeah, I would say that if you ask me, my personal mission is I want to leave the world a better place than I found it. Right? There's something that I want to. There's nothing in particular that calls me. Like there are some people who are very particularly care about the environment, or very specifically care about equality or women's rights or what have you. I care about all of them. I want to leave the world a better place than I came in, and wherever I can have impact, I want to. There are some things that resonate with me more than others. For example, like environmental tech is a big deal for me. I would spend more of my focus there, but that doesn't mean that that is in itself is my mission. So yeah, so that's a sort of broad and very rambly thing, but as a result, though, for me to find a place to work where, I mean, work is a big part of our lives, right? The majority of our lives are spent at work. I want to make sure it's meaningful work. It's not work that is, I don't know, making sunglasses. I don't know, something that
Okay.
really have a lot of impact in the world. So this is why I chose Block. I mean, Block to me is a mission driven company. They have a focus on economic empowerment. They have a vision of using technology and using innovation to help address people who are unbanked, to lift people out of poverty and things like that, and bring people into the financial world who otherwise would be locked out. So to me, that resonates really deeply, right? There's a mission there. I'm spending my life actually doing something that will impact lots of other people in a positive way. So yeah, that's why I choose that. That's why, for example, I wouldn't choose, I don't know, a video streaming company. I'm just making this up, right? Like it's like, okay, video streaming, cool, but the technology challenges are great and all, but what impact am I really having on people's lives?
Okay. So, what do you think is most important for unbanked people in the world right now? Because it's a really huge trend. Like everybody are talking about, like you need that the unbanked population in the world is a really great addressable market. Yeah. So, but it can be different for different countries. So what do you think? What specifically can be done here?
Well, I mean, the advent of mobile phones has really helped a lot because they've been so broadly distributed that there's been a bit of technology leapfrog happening. So all of a sudden, entire communities that otherwise were just disconnected from the world are suddenly connected. So that's great. We can now use that connectivity to now start to broaden the financial network as well. Um, and of course, historically, there's always been a problem with financial systems. They've always been designed to cater to people who are wealthy. Um, so some of that needs to be
Yes.
rethought in everything from fee structures to what access have you got to financial products and financial services. And in part, that is what Block is doing. It's part of Block's mission. That always started from, I mean, from our very first credit card reader. You didn't have to have an established business with a track record of revenue before you can go to a bank and say, hey, I need to get a Visa machine so I can accept Visa cards, right? It doesn't matter, anyone can get one. So that was the very start of that mentality, of that thinking. This is for everybody. It's not meant to be exclusionary.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And talking about Square, and if you talk about the unbanked population, the strategy, to my opinion, should be different for different countries. So, like for example, in the USA, you already have like a legacy financial system, like very established, yeah, but with different regulations, with different institutions, with different players playing on this market. With some other countries which are like emerging countries and maybe they have less established financial institutions, so maybe the strategy should be different. So what's the difference? Do you have different strategies for different countries within Square specifically?
Well, yes. I mean, I can't go into too many of those details for reasons, but absolutely
Okay.
different. But 100%. I mean, like, it is not a one size fits all. Like, I can talk very generically. So, for example, like in Japan, there is no real culture of using credit cards because credit is considered bad. Everyone uses cash. Credit means that you don't have any money, so no one uses cards there. So okay, but they sort of leapfrogged into their own payment systems using phones and tap. This predates Apple Pay. This is like, Japan's always in the future, right? So they had this stuff before
Right.
Apple Pay even existed. So they had a very different systems there. And then, of course, in China and most of Southeast Asia, QR codes took off in a really big way. Again, so where Apple Pay wasn't, before Apple Pay even took off, right? It's like suddenly everyone's using QR codes and their cameras to make payments. So absolutely, there are different ways of doing things in different regions. There's lots of regional nuance to things. Yeah, we need to be aware of that, cognizant of that, and work with that or help. Like another very good example is in Germany, where debit cards are really popular. Like 50% of, or something like that, a very large percentage of payments in Germany are all on debit cards. And it's not your MasterCard debit card or your Visa debit card. They have their own system. It's an own system that just exists in Germany. So suddenly, okay, well, if you're just building on top of Visa and MasterCard, you're going to be locked out of 50% of the German market.
Yes, I agree. All right, so let's talk about the actually Square and Cash App. So Block Inc. Was established like last year, renamed from Square, and now there are different companies, a number of different companies under the Block umbrella. And can you tell us how it's connected, Square software and Cash App?
Yeah, so I mean, it's really all connected by the same mission, really, the mission of economic empowerment. That's the thread that connects the various companies under Block. Right now, Block consists of Square, which was the old seller business around terminals and payment processing, Cash App, Tidal, so that's another part of the Block family, and a couple of other crypto-focused business units as well. And yeah, they're all connected by the same common thread of economic empowerment. That is the motivating force behind them. So yeah.
But do these companies operate like separate entities or like
That's right.
interconnected from the business operations perspective? So how does it work?
Very independently, yeah. I mean, there's a little bit of sharing, I suppose, that goes on, but for the most part, they're treated as independent companies with independent P&Ls and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And what?
So, tell me, please, if you can, again, what do you think was the most interesting challenge of the data infrastructure scalability that you were able to solve within the Square company, during the last couple years? So, what was the most interesting?
I mean, I mean, none of it's solved. It's all the ongoing things. It's always a continuous mission. Um, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
no, I mean, like our data is spread very broadly all over the company, and that's always hard to manage. We run a microservice mesh. We have a couple of monoliths. Some of them acquired from different companies over time. Some of them are homegrown, and they have their own centers of gravity as well. And it's not just in terms of code, but also, as you said, their data becomes a monolith as well. That's always been tricky to tease apart, and one of the ongoing challenges is how do you actually draw boundaries around that to make sure sharing of that data is intentional. It doesn't happen by mistake. You don't have leaks and things like that. So that's always a challenge, and there's a lot of work that we put in to ensure we have strong boundaries. So, like I said, I can't go into too much detail there for reasons. Some of this stuff is sensitive. But yeah.
All right. Yeah, no problem. So you mentioned about the microservices mesh, and my other question is about so you can have a legacy application, okay, and you should have a kind of re-engineering strategy, and many sees that they're decoupling a monolith application into microservices. This is some kind of strategy here, but maybe can you tell us more details, more specifics? What specific strategies you have for decoupling and decomposing monolithic applications into microservices, from the architecture perspective, maybe from the organizational and team perspective?
Yeah. So I was involved in the decomposition of the original Square Ruby on Rails service, which did everything in the company. It was just one service, and over time that gradually decomposed and broke down, particularly on the payments front. So I was working very deeply in that particular space. Um, and yeah, we just used a strangler fig pattern. It's a fairly well understood pattern of how you build a facade. Everything talks through the facade to the monolith, and over time you pull out pieces from that monolith into separate services. Um, so there was a lot of that going on. It wasn't easy. It really felt like you're changing the engine while the plane is already flying. Right? So it felt very tricky. We had very, very high SLAs on uptime. The cost of outages were very, very high. So having to make sure we were able to do that without any outages was very difficult. And of course, we had to be able to roll back. I mean, there were bugs. I mean, you'd have to, okay, fine, you roll out a step and you move something to a microservice. Something doesn't work, let's say, and sometimes you only detect it like 2 or 3 days later, and you got to move that traffic back to the monolith. But now you've got a gap in data, and how do you join that data in the back end to make sure you haven't lost things? So we built a lot of additional tooling around that to help with that. We built broadly, like I said, it was a strangler fig pattern. We did end up picking up a lot of live production data, anonymizing it, feeding it into staging environments to stress test and load test the new services things were going into, to try and see if expected behavior was coming out of it. Yeah, that's basically what we did. And in terms of team and organization, it was we ended up building out a particular task force for it, like cherry picking specific engineers from different teams who had backgrounds in those specific areas that we were touching. And that's how we ran it. And we also did it on a per domain basis. So, for example, that task force just was focused on getting payments out of the monolith, nothing else. Once we did that, we took up the team, and the team went and did other things, and they were excited to do other things. We then spun up a different team to try and then pull out the user model out of that monolith. If you tried to have the same team doing it over and over again, it was hard for them. It was a burnout sort of role. So we had to cycle people in and have that team then go do something else and refresh themselves really, but also maintain close contact with that new team now that was coming in to work on the next domain object that was coming out, so they could share tools, they could share experiences, they could share patterns that they used, things like that.
Okay, so you mentioned that you have like 70 people on the team, is it correct? So what's the size of the team?
My current team, yes, and on Cash App, yes. Sorry, this story predates that. This story was when I was in the Square seller side of the business.
All right. So, and like, what was the structure of the team, and who reported to you? Just interesting to understand how you structured the whole organization under yourself.
At the moment, so I run an infrastructure team broadly. We break it up into three spaces: core infrastructure, which is compute capacity, networking, and observability tooling. And then we have a data platform team, which is everything from online transactional databases through to eventing systems and pipelines, CDC, down to analytical databases. And then I've got a developer experience team, which focuses on dev tooling, CI/CD, local builds, things like that, and service frameworks.
Yeah, that's interesting. And look, I personally think that it's very important how you structure the team. And also, there is a recommended approach to organizing the teams by following Conway's law. And here is the quote, what is Conway's law? So organizations which design systems are constrained to produce designs which are copies of the communication structure of these organizations and these teams. So actually, I think this is interdependent. So will you agree? And what are your what's your experience with structuring the team and structuring the software? So do you have a similar situation in your team, and what is that?
Yeah, 100%. We absolutely see that, which is where I really like having my developer experience team like as a separate layer from my core infrastructure teams. It means that there has to be a clean interface there between them, and it also means then that, for example, the tooling that my developer experience team builds should in theory work across whether we're using AWS as our core infrastructure platform or GCP or what have you. It gives us that level of flexibility because the interfaces are in the right places. And yeah, 100%, it does reflect your organization structure.
Okay, yeah, and so we talked a bit about the decomposing monolith to microservices, but what would be like your recommendations, maybe some lessons learned, what you need to take into account from the team management perspective to be successful with decomposing like monolith to microservices? Because you can draw, all the diagrams, everything, on the paper, on the diagrams, everything is great, but when it comes to the reality, and you need to do the actual job with your current team. So, what would be your recommendations? Yeah, like how to manage the team, how to do this successfully.
Yeah, the hardest part is maintaining motivation, and that's something that you really need to spend a lot of time focusing on because it's not a fun job. Decomposing monoliths it's full of risk. The risk is very high. And some people like it. I mean, there are some people who absolutely love the buzz out of something as complex as that, but those are very, very rare to find such individuals. If you find them, absolutely make sure you recruit them and get them onto that project. But for the rest, I mean, it's really hard work to motivate people. And I think as a leader, you spend a lot of time focused on your people. Make sure there are lots of celebrations. Make sure there's lots of slack built in because there'll be lots of unknowns, things like that. You can't run it like a traditional project with very, very tight timelines and things like that. That just doesn't work.
So motivation, they connect with the team culture or corporate culture in many cases. So but sometimes they just don't know what is corporate culture. So but what is to yourself, what is the culture of your team or corporate culture?
Yeah, I mean, again, if people aren't aware of the broader culture, right? I mean, I think as a leader, it's your job to spend time with people and make sure they do understand. Personally, I work very well in a one-on-one situation. I spend a lot of time in one-on-ones with people, really understanding, listening, hearing their pain points, and connecting them to the broader mission and the broader culture, and that works well. But that's something, this is where I said, again, when running a team that's busy with a monolith decomposition, you need to spend a lot of extra time doing that. Spend a lot of time listening and hearing and looking for those gaps where people are disconnected to the broader culture. And then you put in that effort to bring them in. It's hugely important.
Yeah, I think that one-on-ones are really important, and you need to have a really good skill to do this one-on-ones because they're different with all the people. So you need to understand what your team member needs, and so what motivates him or her, and if this is something interesting to do, yeah, so maybe the motivation will be high. If it's not, so then motivation will be less.
Yeah, and look for the points, right? I mean, look at where people are slightly unhappy or slightly grumbling, and sometimes they won't tell you, it won't be obvious, but look for the body language, look for the, all of that, all the cues.
Yes, I agree. So okay, so let's recap a little bit about the Square and Cash App. Can you tell us, like, in few words, so like what exactly is Square and what exactly is Cash App right now nowadays?
As a business?
Yes, so like as a business, so what are the major features? What is the major value proposition for the clients?
So Square's primary focus is on the merchant, is in the merchant experience. We started out building credit card readers to process credit card payments on your iPhone or your Android phone. We're well beyond that now. That's the tip of the iceberg, right? We build everything from payment terminal devices, handheld terminals, through to registers that you see in coffee shops all over, through to an e-commerce experience, through to developer APIs for third parties to plug in, and a whole suite of back office stuff. The idea is to let the merchant focus on doing what they're good at and nothing else, right? Take everything else off the table. So let's say you're a chocolate manufacturer. You're really good at making chocolates. Great, right? You don't need to worry about how you process payments, where your money goes, inventory, selling online, even dealing with employees and who's if you don't want tips and payrolls and things like that. We take care of all of that. So there's a lot of heavy lifting that we do for businesses. So Square is hyper focused on the merchant. Cash App is the other side. Cash App is focused on the consumer, and we're trying to build a neobank. So to provide, initially we started as simple peer-to-peer money transfers, and that's grown since then to include a whole suite of financial services and products. Everything from a debit card with rewards through to investing and Bitcoin trading, and so on and so forth. And then there's a lot more coming soon as well there.
Yeah, that's interesting. So as for the Square, so there is a trend about the embedded finance and like loan as a service feature. So do you have something like that? If not, what are your plans here?
I'm sorry, you say loan as a service?
Yeah, like loan as a service and embedded finance, when you provide the financing feature at the point of sale. So on different point of sales, you can provide you can integrate some solution, or maybe you can develop yourself a kind of embedded finance solution to provide loans at the point, specifically on the point of sale. And as soon as the Square covered this functionality, this is like the major functionality for Square.
So we've had a lot of lending related features in the company, various parts. So for example, I think our first lending product was really Square Square lending, where you lend money to the merchant. Again, you already know what the merchant's payment history is like. You've worked with that merchant a lot. You can see their cash flow, things like that. So we ended up doing a very, very lightweight, frictionless sign up process. Like if I have a coffee shop, right, on my admin tab on my terminal, there'll be a button there saying, "Hey, do you want $20,000 to start your next coffee shop?" I don't need to fill out long forms and paperwork and go and meet a banker and shake hands and whatever. I just press a button and boom, I've got 20 grand in my bank account to go and start my second coffee shop. And the repayments just happen through every swipe that I'm taking anyway in the first coffee shop. Like a small percentage goes back to repaying that loan. So that was on the merchant side. We did recently launch consumer lending as well on the Cash App side, and that is effectively advancements if you're getting a paycheck in the Cash App and things like that. But I think what you're talking about is really offering some sort of lending for commerce, right? So if there's a consumer using the Cash App to buy something in a shop, say I'm buying something expensive and I don't want to pay for it all up front. So we did recently acquire Afterpay, and Afterpay is a buy now, pay later company. And we already had integrations with companies like Afterpay, but this deepens that relationship. So it really becomes, we can build more cohesive and end-to-end experiences as a result.
So is it like in progress, the integration of Autopay into Square, or is it done already?
I mean, it can be a long and ongoing project because it's not just one project. We're also exploring and deepening new ways to connect consumers and merchants and things like that. So it's not a one-off and you're done. But no, some features absolutely already do exist. So you can pay with via Afterpay in various places.
As for the let's talk a bit about the data actually, and are you catching up with the growing number of transactions? How do you deal with this growing number of transactions?
Right? Like, I mean, if we're not, catching up implies that we are behind it. If you're behind it, it means we are losing transactions. So we're definitely not. Yeah, no, I mean, like that's a constant challenge. That's an interesting question there, right? How do you stay ahead of your data needs? This is primarily why we are on AWS as opposed to our data centers. We used to run stuff in our own data centers. We just couldn't keep up. The lead time to ordering hardware and increasing capacity in the data centers to meet with your transaction growth, we just couldn't do that. And we were doing a bad job of it. So over time, we had to gradually migrate pieces out to the cloud, even though it was more expensive. Especially at our scale, it is more expensive, but it gave us the flexibility of growth that we could consume that amount of that volume of data coming in. So that was definitely a challenge. Thinking of data stores and the technology we used, that's always an interesting challenge. There are a number of technologies we make heavy use of that are on the table right now to help us scale with that. Yeah. So it's always tricky.
With some of our clients, every year we have a situation of the peak load. Okay, when a peak load of high load of transactions are done during the Black Friday or Giving Tuesday, and every year you need to be prepared for this peak load. So how do you deal with that specifically with that peak loads during the holiday season? Then we have like double, maybe like 5 times more transactions, maybe even more. So all the platforms, they have different numbers, but anyway, it will be something specific, like maybe double, triple, maybe 5 times more than regular.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a case of over provisioning. We do make sure ahead of time we over provision as much as we can to where we think peak load's going to be, and then we add enough buffer and capacity on top. But we also have a lot of automated systems that help us horizontally scale automatically as and when we need it. So we make sure we exercise those, we test those, we're happy with how they are performing. And we have we make sure we have a good on-call roster. I mean, yes, it's holiday times and people are away and all that, but we make sure there's cover, and I think that's really important.
Okay, so look, speaking about the holiday season, I read some press release recently published on squareup.com. It says Square brings its specialized retail and appointment software to Square Terminal for flexible mobile commerce. And they say, quote, as the holidays approach, Square is launching 2 of its powerful vertical-specific software solutions. So the one is Square for Retail, and the other is Square Appointments, on Square Terminal to sellers around the globe. So retailers and beauty and personal care professionals, can now offer customers flexible on-the-go checkout experience for additional convenience and time savings. So my question is, so how does this affect the Square infrastructure, if it affects somehow, and what did you have to do from the infrastructure side to launch that product?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, Square is Block is an ecosystem of startups, and that's a separate company, a separate startup from what I'm working on from Cash App.
Okay.
So we don't share infrastructure. Like I said, we're separate. Um, I, but I mean, I'd hazard a guess. I don't think that there would particularly impact how Square operates its infrastructure. These are just product features using the same infrastructure they always have.
Okay, I got it. So let's come back to the to Cash App actually. So I see that the Cash App team has doubled during the last 1.5 year approximately. Yeah. So what lessons learned can you share about how to scale the engineering processes? Yeah, while having that like very fast scale of your engineering team at Cash App.
Yeah. I mean, that's been an interesting challenge for us. Periods of hypergrowth are always interesting. The growth happens faster than your processes can grow, as I'm sure you're well aware. And Cash always had a culture of behaving like a startup and having minimal processes. We try and keep. We were very process averse, so we try and keep processes down to a bare minimum, and that's always worked. It's worked pretty well for us in the early days when we were smaller, where everyone knew everyone, and even if you weren't in the same office or the same country, you had enough face time with everybody that you knew. There's a lot of a personal connection with everyone, and that really worked well. It's much harder now that the company's grown so quickly. And now we're having to start to introduce some amount of processes just a little bit at a time to try and help manage that scale of people. We've more than doubled in size, as you said. That's correct. And to make matters not worse, but to make matters more challenging, we've also scaled across multiple time zones and geographies. So that makes it hard as well. So yeah, if any lessons learned, I would say I think we need to anticipate that sort of growth, and if you do, we need to start to introduce the processes necessary to manage that growth well in advance. And I think it's something that we're currently doing right now, but it would have been much easier if we started introducing some of that when we were half the size or less.
So do you try to keep the whole team structure more flat or more vertical structured, like hierarchy? So
yeah, it's a very typical hierarchy, like most companies.
Okay, and do you participate in a recruiting process yourself?
Yeah, I do. I spend a lot of time with sell calls with candidates, introductory calls, teaching them about what we do, about Block, about Cash, about Square, talk about my own personal history here and how that's worked. I do spend a lot of time. And then, of course, interviewing and everything else.
Yeah, and we talked about the culture, and in some recent interviews, we talked that when you recruit somebody, you need to take into account whom you bring actually on board. Yeah, so and maybe check the hard skills, but also check the soft skills, and also check if somebody matches your like corporate culture, your values. So how exactly you do you check if somebody matches your corporate culture or not?
Yeah, it just comes out of conversations. So it's something that every interviewer is looking for, in addition to the hard skills, as you said. So when we write up our interview feedback, there is always a section on, whether the person sort of lines up to our values, and will the person be successful in our culture and things like that. So we do ask those questions of every interviewer when they are writing in feedback.
So will you hire the very strong engineer who less fits your corporate culture, or will you hire somebody more junior but who actually fits your culture? So
Yeah, it really depends. I mean, when you say fitting a culture, it's not Boolean. It's not yes you fit and no you don't fit, right? It's more
Okay.
like how do you fit or how much do you fit, like 1 out of 10, right? Or it's much more fluid. And there are certain like red flags, right, that we will not hire for. Like if someone is I don't know. I mean, yeah, you have people who have very interesting tendencies when it comes to dealing with certain people. It's like who are very bullying in their style or whatever, like, or real jerks, right? It's like, no, we don't hire those. No, absolute red flags. um, Whereas there are other places where people may not completely line up to our culture, but that's okay. Where, for example, if they care about our values but it's not they may not be as mission driven, but that's okay as long as they're willing to subscribe to our values. There's a middle ground in some people.
Okay, great. So, Manik, maybe my last question here. So, what data infrastructure trends and challenges to address do you foresee for the next several years?
Yeah, I think federated data is going to be very interesting because companies, once you hit a certain size and a scale, you're going to grow by acquisitions, and you're going to have your data federated across multiple different pieces of infrastructure, whether it's different cloud providers or some will be on-prem and all sorts of stuff. And you can't expect a new company to sit and migrate and move everything to the same system that you do, because that's just wasting everyone's time. So having a data infrastructure that will give you that federated view over where everything is with the right levels of data access, I think will be really interesting.
Okay, so it looks like there is plenty of work to do with the data infrastructure in coming years. And okay, Manik, so thank you for this great talk and being with us today.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, and to everyone who watches, and please like this video and subscribe to our channel. And also tell us what do you think about payments data infrastructure in the comments below. And it was Manik Surtani and me, Vasil Salashuk. And stay tuned and healthy. And see you in the next episodes of our Fintech CTO podcast.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care. Thanks.